Welcome to the Project Mom Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Gorey, mom of a sweet baby girl and an ever-evolving entrepreneur. On this show, we will explore the intersection of motherhood and entrepreneurship. We will share stories of moms just like you and me with the goal of fostering community and comfort in knowing that we are not alone in our experiences. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to ensure you get all the updated episodes and releases. Welcome to today's episode of the Project Mom Podcast. Today I'm talking with Andrea Ippolito. She is the CEO of SimpliFed, a company that provides virtual breastfeeding and baby feeding support fully covered by your health plan from pregnancy to weaning. So Andrea, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so excited because I had done kind of my homework leading up to this podcast recording, and I absolutely love the mission of your company. And I want to make sure we do it justice, but from what I understand from kind of the materials that I saw on your website and the conversations kind of leading up to this company came from a personal challenge of yours, right? And a personal experience that you had when learning to feed your daughter. So I would love it if we could just start there. Share with us a little bit more your journey with motherhood and your experience that ultimately led you to SimpliFed and kind of this challenge that you've experienced personally.
Yeah, I mean, SimpliFed and the problem we're solving and the impact we're creating is incredibly real to me because I felt the pain that a lot of the families that we have the privilege to serve feel. And I think as someone in this arena, just like a lot of folks, having that lived experience definitely matters and helps me build a lot of empathy with what folks are going through. And so my background is as a biomedical engineer and worked in medical devices, worked in telehealth actually for over a decade, and also worked in the federal government. Background as an entrepreneur. This is the second company that I've founded. First company sold to Athena Health. And was in the federal government working at the Department of Veterans Affairs down in DC. And at the tail end of that, I was pregnant with my first daughter, now pregnant with daughter number 3.
Oh, congratulations.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's second trimester. So in that, sweet spot, as we all know, but also still like, what's about to happen? Which is, fun and terrifying all at the same time.
Absolutely.
But I was, pregnant with my first daughter, commuting back and forth between DC and Boston. I was like, this is not going to work. And decided to move to central New York, upstate New York, Ithaca, New York, where at the time I was teaching at Cornell, had my first daughter, had no idea what to expect for surrounding baby feeding, like literally was not prepared at all. I felt like that wasn't covered. And also I hadn't done my own thinking and research, but it just honestly came up, and you're so focused on the labor, right? And that crazy experience, especially when it's the first time and you're like, this is literally an out of body experience. And then, you have the kid, you're holding the kid, and then literally your first job along with your own recovery, whether that was a vaginal delivery or C-section, as we all know, is to feed this kid. And all of a sudden you're trying to make this happen. And for me, I started off breastfeeding, and that's similar to 85% of moms. And, breastfeeding was really hard for me and didn't really work. My daughter was born a little bit early too. She was born at 5 pounds and quickly dipped in the 4-pound range, which is so scary, especially as a first-time parent when you don't realize that's going to happen, but that's very normal actually to have that dip. But, breastfeeding was really hard for me. My supply was really low. And while I did have some lactation consultant support in the hospital and in pediatrics, I guess I just wasn't mentally prepared for what was about to happen. And quickly we had to start using formula and felt a lot of guilt over that. But, now I know in retrospect that is fine and it's okay. And it's a very safe, healthy option. But I felt this guilt and I felt this stigma, but more so, I wanted to breastfeed, and yet it wasn't working, and needed access to more support. And so that's like the mom parent hat. But then I learned the entrepreneur, like healthcare background hat in me learned that under the Affordable Care Act, health plans are supposed to cover breastfeeding support as long as you're breastfeeding in an unlimited amount. And so, the business entrepreneur side of me was like, wait a second, there's this huge need, huge gap in the experience that families are facing. Why don't we improve access to support, but that support be inclusive no matter how you feed your baby, whether that's formula feeding, breastfeeding, pumping. And that's really what birthed SimpliFed.
Yeah, that's amazing. And my initial question back to you is, when you first started to realize that the Affordable Care Act, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the Affordable Care Act is supposed to cover support for breastfeeding. Now, is that disconnect because there, at the time, right, which is where you're filling the gap, there was no programs that supported that type of support, or we just didn't, there weren't insurance companies covering it, or where was the disconnect?
So I don't know where like the root cause of it is, but here's what I do know: that under the Affordable Care Act, commercial health plan and Medicaid expansion plans are required to cover it. And the vast majority of health plans aren't in compliance with that policy. So they don't have providers in network.
Wow.
And I also think that parents, and this is where I was at, had no idea that there's a clinical specialist like a lactation consultant. But by the way, their scope of practice is not just breastfeeding, it's any baby feeding and safe prep and use of formula. But I also think that parents don't know that this healthcare specialist exists. And third is, I also don't think it's baked into the system. Like, I think it's in labor and delivery, but as we all know, your breast milk often doesn't come in for 3 to 5 days after you leave the hospital. And so there's this like, the system is not set up to help support. And so there's a few issues happening. Not health plans aren't covering it because they don't have providers or network. People don't know that there's a evidence-based clinical specialist that gets credentialed and it is certified after literally hundreds of hours, clinical training hours for this. And I also think it's not baked in the system. And that's exactly what SimpliFed is solving for, but doing so inclusively, whether you're formula feeding, breastfeeding, pumping. And that's, I think, the fourth biggest gap in the system, is that it's very much a breastfeeding versus formula, when the vast majority of parents do both, and it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that this is kind of all encompassing for you at this company, because I think you're absolutely right. There's only certain things that we learn as moms and as new parents over time, right? They're not things that, unless they're shared with us from the get-go, we learn through trial and error. We learn through our own personal challenges. And, I had a very similar experience when I gave birth to my daughter. I have a 2-year-old right now. She was born at 38 and a half weeks. So, full term essentially. And I had a really hard time building supply, and I didn't know it at the time. So there was no real, from my understanding, support in the hospital either from lactation consultants. So I attempted to breastfeed. She dipped below the 10% of birth weight you're allowed to leave before they're like, you have to feed her formula, which I'm honestly grateful for, because I would have continued to try breastfeeding, not realizing that I wasn't producing enough supply for her, which at the time, right, is not even really milk at that point, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, so perhaps the journey could have looked a whole lot different if the support system looked a lot different, of, how to support, me as the mom through the journey and all of that. And I remember we left the hospital with, and I don't recall the name. There's like a whole name of this system that they do, but it's with the syringe. And because I still wanted to try and breastfeed, and you like wear a nipple guard, and you like have like a little syringe with formula in it, and you like stick it in the nipple shield, and you breastfeed your child at the same time that you're like pushing in formula. So it simulates breastfeeding so you can still continue the journey. That took a toll on me. I remember walking out of there looking at my husband being like, we have to do what?
How does this work?
How does this work? And we tag teamed it. We did it together. He would do the syringe. I would hold the child, who at the time I would describe as like my cheetah. I'm trying to wrangle a cheetah to the boob because she was hungry. She wasn't getting what she wanted and we didn't know it at the time. So it was like a tag team thing, and neither of us were sleeping because we were both up at every feeding trying to figure out how this works. And I just remember at like 2 weeks old, I looked at my mom and I said, I cannot do this anymore. And that's where my journey ended with breastfeeding. So I can imagine the women who come across your platform and your services finding some level of comfort in knowing that they're not alone in this journey and they can reach out. So maybe share with us a little bit about how the virtual services work for women who are and moms who are participating.
Well, and Emily, thanks so much for sharing that story because holy moly, I was in your same shoes. And you're with the syringe and the piping and you're like, this is so like,
this shouldn't be this hard. This shouldn't be this hard.
And again, sometimes it really works for folks, but I think that's exactly why we're here is because you need access to ongoing support to troubleshoot and whatever your goal is, right? And I think as parents, especially as moms with baby feeding, again, no matter how you feed your baby, you just get to this point where like, oh, I'm done. And that's how I felt too. And it shouldn't have to get there. You should have a trusted healthcare professional that's there with you alongside you to help troubleshoot because it needs to work for you. Full stop, period. And often the current care pathway, you get to this fed up point and it shouldn't take that. You should have access to ongoing support like they do in other countries. And so what our support looks like, it's 100% virtual so that we can be there next to you. Because let's be real, the idea of going to a clinic appointment with this little newborn nugget, often under 10 pounds at that point, and strapping them into that car seat, driving, when by the way, you're recovering, whether it's C-section or vaginal. So the idea of going to another clinic appointment is like insane, right? When you're like just trying to physically and mentally recuperate. Also, let's also be real that they're just house calls is something that can happen, but it's also something that is very expensive. And again, I live in a rural area, but even if you live in a city, even if you live in a suburb, having access to a house call, someone coming to your home is also not feasible for the vast majority of people across the US, especially at a frequency that you need them. So this is where telehealth is actually an incredibly powerful platform because you can improve access to support 24/7, leveraging the scale of the US. And that was actually my background working with the military health system with mental health care and how we can improve access to mental health care services by leveraging the scale of the United of providers across the US. So that's what SimpliFed does. We have a national network of providers. They're lactation consultants that are all inclusive, no matter how you feed your baby, whether it's breastfeeding, formula feeding, they're there to support your goals, whatever those might be. Many of them are nurses or nurse practitioners. And we have national health plan contracts along with local and regional contracts as well, where we get our whole care pathway covered for free starting during pregnancy. So what it looks like is we meet with families one-on-one. We often get referrals from other providers or other moms. They find about us, you have to try out SimpliFed. We do a prenatal education appointment and we talk with parents about what to expect, but also mostly we do a lot of listening. What are your goals? And if you're like me with your first pregnancy and had no idea where to start, then we share options for you. And then we design a plan, but we also set expectations. Look, like your milk doesn't come in at first. It's often droplets at first. Don't get too nervous if your baby dropped weight, because most babies do drop weight. Again, no one had told me that. And so we do a lot to set expectations, but also based on your goals, if breastfeeding is one of your goals, what breastfeeding does look like in that first week, and hand expression and droplets and typical amounts. And then after baby's born, we then continue to work with you virtually in your home virtually. And we work with you at all hours of the day, 7 days a week, because that's what baby feeding looks like in that time period. And it's a experimentation, right? Every situation and context is different. Everyone's goals are different. So we meet with you, make a plan. Here are things going. Often at first, in those first couple weeks, it's a insane period. And so getting access to ongoing support to troubleshoot these needs. Latching is pretty popular. Latching shouldn't be painful. And so we work with them to make sure it's pain-free. We work with folks on positioning. Nothing about breastfeeding, even though it's quote unquote natural, nothing about it felt very natural to me. And so it just felt very awkward. So our providers will work with you. And one thing that people ask is, well, if you're not there side by side, how do you help with things like latching and positioning? But that's the beauty of it, is that we are virtually in your home, so we can see where you are going to be feeding. All right, let's go to that spot, get that pillow, feed up a little bit here, and you can give us that feedback. Feels awkward for me. And then we can troubleshoot in your own home. And we can do so in an ongoing way. If pumping is part of that plan, we work with you on pumping, getting size for pumping. A lot of people aren't using the right flanges, which again causes pain.
Yes. Yeah.
Supply concerns and all the transitions back to work. So we follow you in this journey. And again, it's all covered for free, as it should be under federal law.
Yeah, that's really incredible, because as you're talking, I honestly do feel that is something that was missing for me personally in that journey. So I can see why this company is so powerful and so successful in this journey for you, because there really is this gap that you're filling for these women. And I think about, my personal experience. There was 1, maybe 2-hour breastfeeding class, ahead of labor and delivery, You get a little bit of an insight, but you don't really, and it's just some positions, not, this is what you should do to get them to latch, no troubleshooting, no, support on if this happens, which is a common challenge. They don't really highlight any of the challenges that are common for women in these experiences. So there absolutely is this very glaring gap there. There's also, I'm so impressed that you also touch on the pumping journey, because I think for me, I moved from trying to breastfeed her to pumping. I did it for 6 weeks, gave up because I was, barely getting an ounce on each side, if that, each time I pumped, and I was strapped to this thing for hours on end. And it's funny because everyone I talk to, every new mom I talk to hates pumping. They hate it more sometimes than just trying to breastfeed their kid. They would just rather be attached to their child all day, every day than pump, to give themselves some additional freedom. So I would love if you could talk a little bit about your personal journey. So in terms of, you were hitting kind of this point where you didn't know what to experience with the birth of your daughter and feeding her. And you started to see this gap that was, existing in the system on how to support us as women. How did you support yourself right then and there in that particular moment before you created this company? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, I'm so happy you asked this, because this just highlights the reality that every child is different. And I have 2 daughters, pregnant with a third, and every journey is very different. I know that sounds super cliche, but that is the real truth. No doubt this third kid is going to be a whole lot different than the second kid or the first kid. My first journey actually looked a lot like your journey. Baby dropped weight over that 10%. We tried the syringe model and all that fun stuff, and was like, how did we get here? At 2 a.m. with syringes and and this is tape and whoa. And again, sometimes that works. So if it works, rock on.
Totally.
And my supply was dropping. She kept dropping weight. We started combo feeding. I also think we need to talk about combo feeding more. I feel like it's always positioned as an either or, when a lot of people do both at the same time. And let's celebrate that and recognize that about it. A lot of combo feeding. But with my first daughter, it was very much majority formula, very minority breast milk. And again, that's what worked for me. Like, and then after a while, once you're getting 1 ounce per pump, or you're just like, yeah, let's just move to formula. And that's what worked for me. Now, the second kid, I had started SimpliFed. And by the way, that journey was a long journey. I hate when entrepreneurs talk about, you start a company and then it like all of a sudden was super like successful. No, like, sorry, I was teaching full time and doing it part time, and it was a years long journey there. So just to like be very upfront about that. But with my second daughter, I had access to support via SimpliFed, and so like I like to say, folks, I am like this story of how your experience can get better with when you actually get support. And honestly, the support is mostly for mom. Yes, it's baby gets the outcome of it, but it's for you and your physical health, because breasts are organs, let's be real, and your mental health. And so I got support starting during pregnancy, and I got a lot of support postpartum, an ongoing way. And I did that troubleshooting. I was never able with my first kid really to get breastfeeding at the boob to work. But I got a lot of troubleshooting. And by the way, it took like a couple weeks, and I was like down for that. And again, if you're not down for that, that's also cool. But I was down to get that support, and I actually really liked it because someone was focused on me, not just the baby. As we all know, often once you push out the kid or after a C-section, all the attention kind of goes to the baby, and you're like, hello, I'm over here, struggle.
Totally.
But it was actually nice to get that support for me. And so I enjoyed the appointments, and we worked through different positions that actually worked for me. But I also was a pretty big pumper, and I felt the same way as a lot of folks. But what I liked about pumping was I could see the amount. So it worked for me. Although I definitely had my moments with pumping where, you know, the movie Office Space, when they take the computer out and you're like bashing, like, I'm looking at this pump and I'm like, I can't wait to do that with you. I had both a more traditional quote unquote pump that, you know, had batteries, but also could be plugged into a wall with the flanges. But I also had a Willow, and I loved that because it gave me the flexibility. Like I like to tell a story. I've pumped everywhere, on a boat, on a bike, on a train, on a plane, like and I like that flexibility. But the long story short is I got support, and I made it work for me. And would I rather be, you know, in Italy, in Tuscany, doing something rather than pumping? Heck yeah. I found a plan that worked for me, and that worked for my mental health and my physical health. And it's like it flipped. Like I was able to give more breast milk than formula, but I still combo fed because that's again what worked for my mental health. And then, you know, I think I made it, not that it was about making it, but I made it to about like 9 months to a year, kind of slowly transitioning. And that's what worked for me. And so every journey was very different, and both options are of breastfeeding or pumping, or I would say all three of formula, are like great, and they're all safe. And I think that's something we need to talk about, that it's, you just kind of make it work for you, but work with trained healthcare professionals who can give you those evidence-based practices to be more successful with whatever your goal is.
I love that. I think there's something so empowering about the model that you created, because, you know, just from those first couple of weeks of memories that I have, it really felt like my husband and I making the best decisions we could in those moments, but we didn't feel educated enough. So at times I'd be like on my phone, going down Google rabbit holes on like, well, what happens if I don't produce enough? Or like, what are my formula options? What are all these options that I have? Okay, I have to pump. What type of pumps are there? I wasn't producing enough. So I got, I rented one from the hospital. Then I, was stuck because it was plugged into a wall. But then, I had these friends who had the ones you like slip into, your shirt and you can go bike riding, like you said, and there's all these different options. But I felt so uneducated to a point where I felt disempowered because I just felt paralyzed by needing to like understand all of my options. So I just love how empowering this platform is to the women who are able to get this support. So I just really applaud you for that and kind of taking the initiative to create something just so uniquely powerful and necessary for this massive part of our community. I mean, moms make up so many percent of the world. Like, we need to support each other. So I just really applaud you for that. And I'd love to just get a quick understanding. So I know the support should be covered, right, by our insurance plans. How frequently can women tap into the support? Is this like weekly sessions they can have? Is it, up to 4 months postpartum? Like, what's the longevity and the frequency that women can tap into this service?
So here's the good news. The good news is that under federal law, so this is your right. This isn't just like hey, somewhere Andrea said, this is your right under federal law, starting during pregnancy. For as long as you're breastfeeding in any capacity, you can get support fully covered at no cost to you. And sometimes it stops at a year, but technically under federal law, for as long as you're breastfeeding in any capacity. By the way, SimpliFed provides support for 100% formula feeding moms as well, because formula is so connected to your baby's health. It's connected to mom. So just to also say that as well, that is also part of our care model, but specifically the health plan services piece of it that's fully covered at no cost is that. And I just really want to thank you for your comments, and you're so kind to me, but really, with women's health and specifically breastfeeding, and breastfeeding is part of women's health, or getting support for breast health, breast or organs. There is all this technology out there, right? You highlighted them, pumping, and there's all these evidence-based approaches, but to date, women have been left toiling on their own, overwhelmed by these choices, overwhelmed by this care pathway, and because it hasn't existed, frankly. And often I think this is exemplary of a lot of stuff moms face, is you just figure it out and we make it happen and we get stuff done. But it shouldn't have to be that way. And you should get support to help navigate these options. And in a year where choice has been taken away from women, whether that's with women's health, but also the formula shortage, right? That was incredibly stressful. We need access to evidence-based clinical support more than ever. And that's what our providers do. And they are trained on modern practices because that's what we deserve. And so I just wanted to highlight, get support covered by your health plan, and get evidence-based support based on modern practices so that you can design a plan that works for you.
Yeah, I love, love, love that. And I think it's just so impactful to reiterate over and over again that we don't have to do this alone. So again, I'm just so grateful we're having this conversation and we can share this and get it out really as far and wide as possible. I'd love to take a step back and talk a little bit about that entrepreneurship journey that you mentioned, right? This years long process to get from point A, idea starter, generator, you're in the thick of it, to where you are today. And a lot of the goal of this podcast is to share the journeys that we go through, as new moms, yes, on the mom front, but also for those who have these desires to solve a problem that we personally faced, or to fulfill ourselves in some other capacity than just being a mom. So I'd love to touch a little bit on that business journey for you. Can you share with us just a little bit of how you got from point A of this idea to start SimpliFed, kind of what your situation looked like at the time, right? I think you mentioned you were teaching at the time, you had this newborn, you had this idea. How did you move into producing this and creating and, actually sustaining this idea?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for the opportunity. It's a twisty turny, it's not this, as we talked about, this moment where your light bulb goes off and then here it exists, poof. So for me, based on my experience with my first daughter, I just was this has got to change. This awful. And I do have this background in entrepreneurship. I do have this background in healthcare. And so once this stuff started coming together, and it was one of those things that like you talk about. And so I still teach a little bit part-time to students. And I always tell some folks is when you have something that's like keeping you up at night, and maybe that's literal or figuratively, but something that like you're thinking about, like whether you're driving or in the shower. For me, it's like shower thoughts. I always say, it's
Totally.
like,
Yeah.
keeping me up in the shower. And this idea of like, how do we actually redesign this care pathway, but also provide options surrounding breastfeeding and formula feeding and also pumping. And like, there's this portfolio of things that you can do, but yet it's not curated and personalized and connected to a healthcare provider covered by your health plan. And so this notion kind of kept popping up. And eventually, like you, based on community and friends and family just saying like, well, go do it already. And so yeah, that's what we started working on and pursuing. And I was actually very focused on kind of the formula side of it at first because it felt like there was just a gap, and then realized that, hold on, it's this really care experience, and we need to treat it as this comprehensive care experience and meet parents where they're at. 85% of women start off breastfeeding, most transition to formula at some point. So let's actually start there and actually redesign this based on what we would have wanted to see covered by health plans. And so it's a lot of iteration, it's a lot of talking out, but the key thing is this didn't happen overnight. I didn't quit my job full time. Like, we're doing fine as a family. I feel very privileged that I was able to work on this in my nights and weekends, but like, I don't come from generational wealth where you could just like quit and work on this. And so for me, I was still teaching. And then what you do is you find these like quick wins, or you find these little milestones that you can use. And then I reduced my time to 80% teaching and eventually 50%. So you find this way to stepwise get there. Very much full time on SimpliFed. And for us, it was, finding providers that joined us. And then what we would do is find ways to get this service out there and communicate this to parents. People try this service out. And then we found partners along the way. And so we found a great partner with Milk Stork, and they started reselling our services, right? And that took a bit. And then we got our first health plan contract, leveraging that ACA policy. And then based on that, we could raise money from venture capitalists. And so last year raised $6 million from venture capital. And that's a big milestone, but it's, just the fuel, not the actual impact you're creating. And so then we secured more health plan contracts. Now we're very focused on how do we share this resource with parents. And so as an example, we just got a national Aetna commercial contract. So if anyone's on Aetna, you have access to free support starting during pregnancy. We serve all military families via TRICARE for free starting during pregnancy. We have a number of Medicaid contracts across the country. So you find these like milestones, and maybe at first they are smaller, but then you like build and build and build and build. But it's very iterative. It, founded this in 2019, and here we are in 2023. And it took a lot of time.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you highlighting that journey because, it is a progression, right? You don't go from one point to another in the flip of a switch. And it's not, a lot of, I think, what we see a lot these days is instant gratification, right? This need for, well, if it's going to work, it's going to be easy. Or if it's meant to be, it should be going better by now. And I think a lot of that is really just false narrative to like keep us looping in something. So I just really appreciate you sharing that kind of trajectory of, at the beginning, it's small wins. It's, getting yourself to a point where you can, make enough to reduce your hours at your job, or, to focus a little bit more on partnerships that you want to, have companies resell your services, right? Things like that. So I really appreciate you sharing that too, because as moms, right, we become new women, right? We are not the same person that we were prior to the birth of our child. So while we are different, a lot of our desires still exist. So it's how do we then navigate both of those and continue to educate ourselves and empower ourselves on the mom front, on the business front, and just trust the timeline. on all of that.
Totally. And you think it's going to be one experience before, and no doubt it's going to be different. And I think giving ourselves a bit of grace to roll with it, and also know that the way society is set up, sometimes we're not given that flexibility. And so I think we need to be the strongest advocates for ourselves and find a way to make it work, and really roll with it as much as you can, but also set expectations with yourself that it's okay for it to look different and to your priorities to change.
Totally. And I think you hit on it right there too. It's like a perfect transition. So, from what I saw on your website, there's also part of what you're doing to educate employers, right? So there are women who are going back to work after maternity leave, who are entering a phase of life where their priorities are different than when they were, at work prior to the birth of their child. And they feel very much alone in this, or their companies don't afford them the time that they need to pump, or, the location, a safe location to do so, or resources to do so. So I'd love it if you could just talk a little bit about the work that you're doing from an employer perspective on kind of the benefits to them in, sharing these resources with their, female employees.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do apologize if you hear some hammering in the background. At my
It's
house.
real life.
Yeah,
I
real
love
life.
it. Yep.
One of the things we like to do is work with employers to advocate on behalf of their employees about this resource that, by the way, is within their health plans network. So it's not an extra buy up that they have to make. It's just, part of the care, part of the services that you get as part of that you pay a lot of money for with your health plans. You gotta leverage it. But often when the notion of women in the workforce gets brought up, it's talked about as what employers should be doing to accommodate working parents, which I actually think is the right conversation. But I think the part that's missing from the conversation is that it's often framed in like a way that feels like philanthropy, like employers, should do this to help support their working parents. And what I like to always say is, it's not philanthropy. It's just darn good business sense. That it's actually not a pipeline issue right now with women in the workforce. Women are getting more degrees than ever. We're entering the workforce. We're almost half the workforce. And where we're not thinking creatively and thoughtfully is for those that want to stay, based on our last conversation, like it's okay for your situation to change and your goals to change. That is awesome. And let's celebrate and actually let's rock on. And for those that want to stay in the workforce, whether that's working inside the home, outside the home, let's transition the argument from it being, let's find flexible work opportunities or provide breastfeeding support programs or lactation rooms. Let's take those not as philanthropy, but for those that want to stay in the workforce, how do you retain them? Because we know that organizations that have women do better. They are more profitable. Employees are more productive. They are better performing organizations, period. And there's been endless studies on this. So people that say we need more data, nope, the data is very clear that companies and organizations that have women perform better. So supporting for those that want to stay in the workforce, supporting them with flexibility. Maybe that is working remotely. Maybe that is having, different hours. Maybe that's allowing them to work flexibly. Maybe that's job share, but allowing them paid parental leave. And by the way, it needs to be both parents that get paid parental leave, because that's how equity happens and how women don't get left behind for those that want to be in the workforce. So we work with workplaces to help share resources to help them make that support available, but also to help support that transition, so that they can continue to have folks in their workforce that want to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's also a lot of research behind the impact on companies when you do lose an employee, right? Just like the financial repercussions and the onboarding that needs to happen to bring somebody on, the gap, right? It leads to, other employees having to have coverage and then burnout. And I just feel like the impact is like exponential, right? So to be able to support the women and the dads too, who want to stay and be present parents, but also really dedicated employees is so important. And I love that you highlighted the kind of need for equitable resources, right? So not just for the moms who are physically taxing their bodies to support the life of a newborn, but also to give the partners a chance to also have that opportunity to be home with their kids. And it's funny because I think this generation, like my generation of moms, our generations of moms are wanting that, right? We want more dedicated partners who have the capacity to be not necessarily home during working hours, but like not burnt out when they get home from working hours, or can be present before the kids go to bed and not expected to, be, killing themselves at work, because we can have some sort of equitable partnership and all of this. And a lot of that is, giving the partner a chance to have leave and bond with their kids, but also to give the women a chance to support themselves in this like physical changes that they're going through, and they're not burning themselves out at work to come home and burn themselves out at home. So I love that is also a priority for you in this company.
Yeah. And we just launched actually a partner class. And it's for all partners. We also have dads often come to us a lot saying, I feel super helpless in this. And I know that's like separate than what you're talking about, but we believe that both mom and dad or both partners should be able to take that leave, because that's actually how women don't get left behind. And we also know that dads feel a little bit helpless, especially in the baby feeding arena. So we actually just launched this class to arm them with education and tools of here's how you can be helpful, whether that's with formula feeding, with bottle feeding, like you can participate in that, and cleaning the bottles, cleaning the pump parts. If there is combo feeding, if there's pumping, like how you can be part of those midnight or late night feedings, and just arming parents, or if they are fully breastfeeding at the breast, like here are other things that you can be doing to help support. And, we shouldn't like in a way have to do this, but in the way like it is nice to bring transparency, and also so parents can moms in particular can send this to their partner and say, listen to this. But I think it's all put on mom often, and we need to evolve as a society because we're equal partners in this arena. You were there at the beginning of this journey with the confusion.
Yep, absolutely. And I love that you highlight that, because there is a part of us who feel like we shouldn't have to be giving direction, right? We hold the whole load of what we need, what this baby needs, how the partner can help. A lot of the time, I know I personally get a level of resentment of like, why can't you just know this by now? Or like, can't you just, observe and deduce what you need to do? And I think the big piece of that is they don't, and that's okay, right? They were not, it's generational, right? This is generationally held, these beliefs of the man's role. And we're trying to break a lot of those habits and those belief systems, like within this entire systemic, setup. So I think that the fact that you are taking a lot of that load off of the mom individually as well, and providing some resources for the dads to actually say, I know I want to do something. I have no idea what it is I want to do. Let me at least take this class and get some ideas. So it takes a lot of the pressure off of the mom to say, I need to make sure I have water. Can you just like bring me water, right? The dads can always be making sure that the water is filtered. They can be more empowered themselves to participate in this journey and not wait for direction. Because I know for me personally, if I have to give direction all day, every day, I lose my mind. I'm like, could you do some observing and deduce something right now? Like that would be great.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting. Like I appreciate when dads say they feel helpless, but it's actually like pretty easy to observe. Like, mom's physical and mental health is deteriorating. Well, let's make sure she's fed. Let's make sure she gets some sleep. Let's think about ways. It shouldn't take us telling you, this notion of mom always being the default parent, even though we should be equal partners, we shouldn't have to be the default. And so I rock on with everything you just said.
Yeah. And it's so funny because I always remind myself too, like, just to have a little bit of compassion, like, this isn't the way his brain works, right? And I won't speculate on the whole, general population of men, but I imagine my husband's not the only one. It's just not how his brain works. And I've grown to love that about him. But I do love that there are ways that you're implementing classes and tools for them to then empower themselves to step up. So I don't have to do it. And it just makes things all around a little bit simpler.
For sure. For sure. I think that's exactly it. Like, it's a bit of both. It's a bit of empathy, and we're wired differently, and you can do some observation here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny too, because I think coming from somebody who's not your wife probably resonates a little bit more too, right? If somebody is, educating you in a class and they're like, observe, see what your wife needs, that sounds a lot more doable than, when I'm sleep deprived in the corner, I'm like, can't you just effing observe what it is I need? Like, do you see my water cup's empty? Like, I'm sure the delivery of the facilitator is a lot more well received than me as a sleep deprived mom.
Exactly. 100%. By the way, like, it's a lot of mental energy to figure out how to deliver things thoughtfully. So if you can just defer, and 100% agree.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to, just for the sake of time, I'd love to just talk a little bit about your approach moving forward with, working on SimpliFed and spearheading this company as the CEO and growing your family. I mean, what does the next, couple of months, year look like for you personally? And how are you supporting yourself through this transition period again?
Yeah. So a big part of supporting myself is asking for help. And I think it's important to recognize the privilege that I have and the ability to ask for help. So I just want to say that. But there's this article, and I forget what magazine, that said that we as women leaders need to, share the support systems we have. And while I 100% agree with that sentiment, again, it's just like another tax. So like, here we are having to share, but I also think it's important. So all that being said, how I'm protecting myself is my kids are in daycare, and we're making an investment, and it's annoying investment in one sense, doing it alongside of daycare, full-time daycare. Again, an au pair, because with 3 kiddos, both of us are, working full-time, and that's the decision we've made. It's not ideal. I like to say we're always failing forward, but that's what I felt like we need for our mental health, and we're going to see how it goes. But I think the key is you have to figure out like what works for your family, and what is your goal? What feels right now? And by the way, that can change, and that can change. And I know I've heard you talk about this in the past too, right? What you're doing now can change, and you have to feel good about what you're doing now and give yourself that grace to make decisions. But for me, it was finding that support tribe. And by the way, that causes lots of drama and all the other things. But that's what we're doing now to make it work in this moment.
Yeah. I love that you highlighted that too, right? In this moment, that's working for you now. And that's the big key, right? It's like we are only promised the now, right? The now is the moments that matter. It's the ones we can impact. It's the ones that we are living in. So how can we create the right situation for us now without the worry of what that's going to necessarily mean in the future, right? When we get to the present moment, which is the future moment, right? In this current conversation, we can make a different choice. We can make a different educated decision based on the new situation that we're in at that given moment. So I love that you highlighted that. And think there's also, and I'll touch on it really just quickly, the piece that you mentioned, there's a lot of opinions, right? And you're kind of at the risk of other people's opinions. And I just love that you guys are still continuing to make a choice what's right for you and your nuclear family, not what's right for the in-laws or the parents or the friends or the other support teams, or, you put them in daycare, so you can't also have an au pair because what's that going to look like? All those things. There's so many opinions we can get wrapped up in, looped up in, that at some point you got to put those aside and do what's right for you. So I love that you highlighted that and just shared that sentiment.
Totally. Yeah. And there's a lot of voices, voices.
Yep.
And you just have to put yourself first and your mental health first, because you can try to make all these accommodations, but if you're not good with it, it doesn't matter for your family's health, for your kids' health. We like to say that there is a safe replacement for breast milk. There's no safe replacement for a healthy, functioning mom.
Absolutely.
And so if you're not there mentally with your decisions, then it's going to make it so much harder, and you need to put you first.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just really appreciate you sharing this journey and walking us through your experience and how SimpliFed came to be and the services that it's providing. So I would love if you could just give us a quick rundown of how those listening can engage with the company, where they can find you. What's the best way for them to start engaging?
Well, we would love for you to come check out our website, SimpliFed.com, SimpliFed.com. We tried to be punny with our name. Come find us on Instagram at SimpliFedBaby. You can text us to start getting support covered by health plans for free. Text CONNECT to 888-458-1364. But come check us out, because we'd love to help support you. Share with your friends, because this is a resource that folks should have access to and know about.
Absolutely. And we will make sure that we link all of those in the show notes for this episode. And we'll be sure to promote it out to the audience and those listening, and just those around us. And honestly, I'm probably going to tap into this too the next go around. So love, love, love. Thank you so much, Andrea, for being here and sharing this with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, please help us out and leave a review wherever you listen, and consider sharing with your friends. If you're interested in learning a bit more about the project or want to share your story, please visit our website linked in our show notes below.